Welcome, friends. For all of you who have gathered this morning, you offer a gift to all who are here gathered around you, and that is your willingness to bring yourself, your whole self, which is welcome here, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey. And so I welcome you to hear these words of gathering and expansive opening to community which would bring life and life abundant. From the Tao. Before creation, a presence existed, self-contained, complete, formless, voiceless, changeless, which yet pervaded itself with unending motherhood. Though there can be no name for it, I have called it the way of life. Perhaps I should have called it the fullness of life, since fullness implies widening into space, implies still further widening, implies widening until the circle is indeed whole.
So sometimes life happens. So we're going to be a little bit flexible today, and we're going to change up a little reading because our first reader couldn't make it. And for those of you who were here last Sunday, you're going to have to bear with me because Matthew Cockrum, who came back last week to share with us, shared this, but it rung true for me. And this is in the back of the hymnal that we just sang out of. It's 478. It's a prayer of sorrow, and it comes from the UN Environmental Sabbath program. If you do want to follow around, it's 478, but I'll read it. We have forgotten who we are. We have alienated ourselves from the unfolding of the cosmos. We have become estranged from the movements of our earth. We have turned our backs on the cycles of life. We have sought only our own security. We have exploited simply for our own ends. We have distorted our knowledge. We have abused our power. Now the land is barren, and the waters are poisoned, and the air is polluted. Now the forests are dying, and the creatures are disappearing, and the humans are despairing. We ask forgiveness. We ask the gift of remembering, and we ask for the strength to change. Now it's my turn. Welcome. Morning. Morning. One of my favorite things about Fountain Street is that people actually respond when you say that in the morning. Only a couple times have I done this, but only a couple times have I had to say we're doing this again. Welcome. If it's your first time in Fountain Street Church, welcome. We're a little flexible sometimes here, a little different. It's one of the things I appreciate. One of the other things I appreciate is that if you ask, if you're asked to do something like this, and you never thought that you would do something like this, and you have an amazing music director, and you say, help me, there's a harpsichord then when you get there in the morning and you think you just walked into a French parlor party, and then the music director tells you how a harpsichord works. So if it's your first time here, welcome. You're going to hopefully get something from this. You're going to hear music from Harry Potter. If you're not, even if you are here and you're not used to seeing a PowerPoint presentation, you're going to see that. So we're going to have a little bit of time here together. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm very appreciative of you being here today. So thanks so much, and enjoy your time here.
We take time as a community to practice the art of quiet, the art of ingathering, of hearing the still small voice which is given to each of us as a right of our birth. And so let's take time now to do that. I want to do it in context of the reading Jack offered, which gives a wonderful and simple explanation for the purpose of prayerfulness, mindfulness, meditation. It is seeking the gift to remember, to literally remember, to put back together maybe what has happened. This is a reference to our past. That past might be 5 minutes ago or 50 years ago. Each one of us comes today, I think, with some sense of the weight of those things that have passed. It then asks for us to practice this miraculous art named forgiveness. An art which too often is manipulated into control over who is right and who is wrong, when in fact forgiveness is the remembering of the truth that there is a place beyond right and wrong, where we are simply good as we have been made. And so that literally at the end of every breath, no matter what has happened in the moments or years or decades or even centuries before, each and every one of us is given the right to say, and I and you are good. And from that moment, we are then invited to a strength to change the moment that will come. So that's the practice, and I'd like to welcome you to it this morning, recognizing, I think, a wonderful theme which has arisen in the last several weeks of our summer worship, a theme that was not intentionally planned by the last several of our speakers, but I think if you think back to Chip Wall's very revealing story of his childhood, and to Matthew's exploration of his failed liberalism, the ultimate liberal failing at liberalism. And I think today you will hear yet another voice willing to widen the circle to say, see me as more than the image that I or the world might be willing to show you. There's more there, and it's not perfect. And I and you are good. You might consider, as we gather in silence here, practicing this in a physical way. We do this in our chapel worship during the church season by paying attention to remembering whatever it is you brought with you this morning as a part of your breathing in. Literally do that with me. And then imagine a moment beyond the fullness of your breath, which makes just a little more room. It's always there, right? You can always take just a little more breath. That is the space in which I invite you to hear the voice which says, and you and I are good. So if that rhythm helps you as we gather our hearts and minds in silence, I welcome you to it. In the remembering, in the forgiveness, and in the strength we would find in hearing that voice which is a gift to us, one and all. Let's join ourselves as a community of hearts and minds in prayerful meditation. And finding our way home to this space, the people saw and heard that you and I are indeed good. I'm not sure if any of you noticed it in that minute and a half or so there, but it can be tempting to be troubled by the sound of the tiniest little voice amongst us. Anybody? Let me welcome you to the truth of your life. There is no place where you can go where your life gets quiet and everything is convenient. That is a gift of practice there. And I want you to pay attention to the fact that it speaks back to us. That little one, after about a minute, saw all of your anxiety come down quite a bit and quieted. They read the room. Yeah.
Hi. My name is Rachel Gleason, and I'm honored to be here today, asked by Jack, to share a poem that I wrote. This is a poem that I wrote a few years ago, and I wrote it, and a lot of it talks about the story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. And to me, that story has always been inspiring because the idea that our voices have that much power is incredible to me, and is something that I share with students in schools to find their voices. Also, I think we have a tendency to be our own biggest enemies, and this poem is about realizing the power in ourselves to be also our own biggest help, and to tearing down the walls that we build in ourselves. So this poem is called The Other Side of Jericho. The human wall is a machine, a complex network, a starlit series of intricate compartments interconnected by superhighway synapses, my gray matter mechanism. Fold upon fold of intellectual potential, flickering at the light of a lingering ghost, asserting its unrelenting presence, and there is a myth that we only use 20% of our full brain capacity. But that isn't true. And if you ask me, that's just an excuse for apathy. And maybe that's why everybody laughs at me, because I use humor as a defense mechanism. Because we all fall short, but at least I know my place in this organism. I know that life is chaos, is ridiculous beauty. I know that mutation creates diversity, that consciousness is random, is fractal absurdity, and I want to laugh. I want to laugh like Sarah laughed when the angel told her that her 90-year-old womb bore life. I want to howl with laughter until I weep in gratitude for my ability to be, to analyze, to speak, because my brain is a miracle machine and I am an inadequate vessel struggling to seize endless opportunities that have been laid before me. And still, I regret nothing. Not a single wasted moment, because I chose it. And all time is now, is future, and is history, is constantly rising and setting. The hot sun burning my back as I wander, the hot sand burning the bottoms of my bare feet, and I would wander through this desert for another 40 years, as long as it brought me to my promise, as long as it brought me to my knees and back to my burning, bleeding feet on the other side of Jericho from my dream. And I want to scream. I want to scream like Joshua screamed. I want to be red-faced and holy. I want to scream until my voice becomes a howl no human ear can hear. I want to scream until the walls I have built, unimaginably high, inconceivably thick, that mortar and brick begins to crumble and split by the force of my sound. I want to scream like Joshua screamed. I want to be that desperate and unleashed. I want to scream against everything that separates me from me. I want to scream until heaven has no choice but to answer, because I want what was promised to me. I want to scream until inactive synapses begin to crackle and finally to fire, because human will is physical, is palpable, and anything is possible, because mountains are made of the same grain as mustard seeds, because the God in us can bury great cities under even greater seas, because all time is now, is future, and is history, and we are all a part of this ridiculous reality, and the breath in my lungs is the same cosmic wind that brought this world to be, and it is finally time to awaken the God that sleeps in the deepest part of me. Thank you.
I have made a grave miscalculation. And I scheduled this. I should not have put her before me. And it's not the first time I've heard her. Not even close. So when I was first asked to do this, my first reaction is, what in the world do I have to say that anyone's going to find remotely interesting? And I now think that even more. Thank you, Rachel. And especially because I regularly claim to be an open and shut book, a transparent one, and also not a very interesting one. I also hear fairly regularly from people around Fountain Street that they don't hear much about me personally or know much about me personally, which I also find a little bit strange, because I really feel like I never shut my mouth. Which some of you are probably like, eh. And maybe after today, the rest of you are like, yeah, you know what, we're good. Not anymore, okay? But seriously, one of the things I will maybe give myself a little credit for is I've been smart enough to keep my ears open through my life, and very lucky to have been surrounded by people who are incredibly talented, and through that glean some knowledge and inspiration. And in true Oscar fashion, I could use this entire time in thanking them, and then Marilyn would have to play me off, and nobody wants that, especially probably not Marilyn. And so I'm going to spare you all that, and you'll, if you're in the room, those people, you just have to give me a pass. Though I will admit that one of the honors I do currently have is serving as the board chair for the Diatribe, which is a poetry and arts collective of which Rachel is one of the founding members. And when I agreed to do this today, part of the reason I did that was because I thought maybe I can get Rachel to perform a piece. So thank you, Rachel, for that. Earlier this week, I shared the Facebook event for this on Facebook, and it included a brief list and an incomplete list of things I thought were more likely than me giving a sermon in a church. And if you can't read that, it includes running with the bulls, classic, winning an Olympic medal in badminton. I've only done it at the Pan Am Games, which that's not true. And then essentially living the plot to Back to the Future 2, which would, if you don't remember, involve me traveling back in time with a farmer's almanac, betting on sports, so that in the future I'd have a successful casino empire. Essentially, I guess what I'm saying is what Fountain Street Church has done in the last year for me is challenged me to things that I never thought I would do, or at least maybe owning casinos was more likely. What I think is also appropriate is that last week Matthew Cochran was here and he talked about confessions. And as Jason said, confessions of a lapsed liberal service, and I think that's appropriate because a little later I'm going to do just that and practice a little bit of that confession. So at this point you're probably asking, what the heck is this guy talking about? And in a nutshell, what I'm going to be talking about is social media's impact on self-esteem. And to me, that's a very important topic, not only because of the increased use today, but in some cases also our dependence on it. And I'm going to change to a graph again here, and if you can't see the numbers on it, don't worry, just notice that it's going up considerably. And what this shows, this is data from the Pew Research Center. And what this shows is data for adults, and adults who use at least one form of social media. And it's a 10-year period, and in 10 years it went from 7% to over 70%. And what that means is there are a ton of ways that we can go with this. And you're still probably asking yourself, and rightly so, where is he going with this? And I'm going to try and narrow it down at this point, because there are so many theories, papers, research topics, and I would highly recommend, if any of this makes any sense to you at the end, to look into it. So if it piques your interest, I'm happy to share any research or any of those things that I've come across. Just let me know and I'm happy to share it with you. Some of these over here, how has our communication changed over the period of that graph and beyond? I mean, the way that we communicate with people has changed considerably. So many people across the country and globe now only communicate with alphanumeric texts. Communication has changed. The nuances, the nonverbal communication is gone. And that's amazing. 27% of romantic relationships now start online. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's tripled in the last 5 years. Relationships within family can be now maintained using, again, alphanumeric text only. We now update people on major life events and surgeries. How's so-and-so doing? Maybe the support is sent back using only an emoji and things like that. Self-evaluation versus social standards, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Rich get richer theory and the poor get richer theory, those are real fascinating. The rich get richer theory talks about the already popular use social media to not only affirm but enhance popularity. And Poor Get Richer talks about what social media and the internet can do for the traditionally introverted to make connections, and what it can do for amazing things to make connections, and loneliness and depression. It's fascinating stuff. That also gets into some of the stuff on evil internet and depression. It used to be thought that there was nothing to be gained out of use of that evil internet, and it was only going to lead to the social downfall of society. And there's some fascinating research from some Dutch researchers that shows the direct opposite. So that's a good point for me to say there is amazing stuff that the internet, social media can do for you. It's not doom and gloom. For me personally, one of those is podcasts. If you have an interest, you can find 9 podcasts that are going to talk about that. And one of the great things for me that it does is they will be a numerable number of people that have attained some level of success, awards, whatever you quantify it as, that will talk about the things that you're still dealing with in your personal life. And it will, at least for me, reduce those stigmas associated with self-doubt and things that we'll talk a little bit about further that will humanize it. And it's amazing. There are great things there. The internet is not a completely evil place. Slot machine effect and intermediate reinforcement is a super fascinating thing. Again, if any of that strikes with you, I'm happy to talk about. So again, what is this guy talking about? And what I really want to focus on today is basically self-esteem. And I'm not going to read that definition to you, but I will mention it comes from the University of California, Davis, and I mention that mainly as a stall technique, so if you're interested in it, you can read the definition. Because what I want to do is focus on mainly that last part, and that last part being positive self-esteem gives us strength and flexibility to take charge of our lives and grow from our mistakes without fear of rejection. And I think this is a very important part to think about when we're talking about social media use. Grow from our mistakes without fear of rejection. Because as social media use has increased, we are constantly flooded with series of success, with just stories of success constantly. And what that does is continues to stigmatize failure and mistakes. If there's any scientists out there, the scientific method is an amazing thing. Change the variables and try again. The power that we have given words, like failure and mistakes, I don't understand. What we need to do is be empowered to grow from the mistakes without the fear of rejection and judgment. So I want to briefly put up some statistics again. This comes again from our friends at the Pew Research Center. And this is a group of adults ages 28 to 73. And they interviewed a group of people again about social media usage. And the first one you'll see there is 60% of people reported that social media use had affected their self-esteem or impacted their self-esteem in a negative way. 50% reported that it impacted their relationships in a negative way. And then the last one, 80% reported that they felt it was easier to be deceived by others through sharing on social media. And I want to talk about that one a little bit more and talk about it through something called single lens theory. And single lens theory is something where you look at something where it's only the highlight reel of someone's life. So a social media stream or something where someone's only posting the pictures where they think make themselves look good, or the glamorous food and travel, not the things that are the bad hair day kind of stuff, the challenges, the mistakes, the self-doubt, that kind of thing. It's just the stuff that makes them look good. So we're going to use Michael Jordan to illustrate this a little bit. We're not going to debate if he is the greatest of all time or not. As a Bad Boys fan, this was challenging for me. But again, we're not going to debate that. These are just some of his accomplishments. This is another one. So Michael Jordan turned the ball over 2,924 times. If we looked at that through a single lens, we could tell a different story. If we could find someone that was unfamiliar with him and we made a highlight reel, or I guess in this case a low light reel, we could tell a little bit different story about how Michael Jordan succeeded at basketball. I will admit I did pick a picture of him playing against the Pistons in this. But if I'm being real honest, it was really hard to find one where he wasn't just getting clocked across the head by the Pistons. And again, in the spirit of real honesty, he probably still made that shot. At least it wasn't a turnover. But again, single lens, if we adjusted it, not his full career, it wasn't like it was one game, we can tell a different story. So again, in full honesty, I have a love-hate relationship with even the title that I made of this. To think that my mouth would utter the words, "I'm impressive," makes my stomach churn a little bit. But what I hope that it does is communicate that what I'm not doing here is pointing any fingers. I'm not trying to get you to change your behavior or try and get you to share something that you're not comfortable with. What it is again, as I kind of briefly alluded to earlier, is a little bit of personal reflection and confession. And so, as I have promised some people, what I'm going to do in that is share some examples of my own social media, poke fun at myself, and we're going to do that through something called self-awareness theory. And self-awareness theory talks about comparisons, and specifically upward comparisons, where if we are comparing ourselves to a subject that we think is superior, we're going to have a negative impact. And if we're comparing ourselves to something that we view as inferior, a positive one. And one of the things there that creates a challenge is, what if the superior subject is of our creation? And the superior subject of our creation is ourselves. And specifically, studies have shown that we naturally measure ourselves against the subject of our own creation online, ourselves, the image of ourselves that we create online. And that one that can be very unattainable. And we've got enough challenges in life. We don't need to be creating an unattainable version of ourselves online that we measure ourselves up against. Let's look at some examples of myself doing this. This is a picture I posted online that falls into that category of food that I mentioned earlier. It is a chai tea latte. I have no idea how much it cost because I posted it in September of last year, and I have not had one of those since. The barista that created it did a very nice job making it. It's very pleasing. But it also creates the narrative that I am A, up and functional at 7 a.m., downtown at a hip coffee joint, which I am not, and B, that I can regularly afford expensive coffee and tea, which is just financially unattainable. And those are two things that if I hold myself to, those are unrealistic. This is another picture, and this one would fall into the travel category. All right. I took this picture recently in Hilton Head, South Carolina. It looks pretty nice, right? It was. I agree to that. So I took this picture when we were visiting family in Hilton Head, South Carolina. And what that picture doesn't accurately communicate is that we were only able to take that trip because we were visiting family and did not have costs associated with the accommodations. My wife and I saved to be able to pay for gas, to be able to pay for entertainment and food. But there are factors that were not represented in that feed, right? But I'm living my best life, right? I mean, why can't everybody my age be poolside right now? So the problem isn't that we create a faux persona online and represent it to other people. The problem can be when we create the faux persona and then misrepresent it to ourselves. What happens then when I start questioning, what am I doing wrong where I can't afford to do that actually? I start holding myself accountable to that subject and myself inferior to this representation of myself that I've created. And what happens when unknowingly I start changing my literal online narrative and bio? So, when we use social media, we get affirmation. Likes, retweets, thumbs up, pats on the back. I'm not a huge user of it all the time. And this affirmation can start to change how we represent ourselves. And so the social media platforms that I use the most tend to be Instagram and Facebook. And I found that the things that I posted that got the most affirmation were drawings on napkins that I do for my kids' lunches and pictures of my dog. He is a pretty cute dog. So what I found then is, again, those were getting the most affirmations, most thumbs up, all of that, shares, that kind of thing. And that then creates that positive correlation. I even had PBS Kids and Cartoon Network give positive affirmation. Feels good, right? So this is my actual Instagram profile and bio, which then states, mostly napkin drawings for my kids' lunches and pictures of my dog. I didn't consciously think, you know what, I'm getting good response on this, so I'm going to change how I represent myself to the world and my bio to reflect that. And in fact, I can honestly tell you, I did not even recognize that until I was writing this for today. I unconsciously changed how I was representing myself to the world based on others' affirmation. I gave them control of my personal narrative based off that affirmation. All right. So I promised some aspect of confession, right? And this is where I'm going to try and personally break out of that single lens. Yep, that is me. Sometime in high school, I'm not exactly sure when, though judging by the glasses frames and the hair length, my guess is it was the summer between my freshman and sophomore year. That's not really applicable. I'd like to say that the reason that shirt appears to be 4 sizes too big is because it was the style at the time. I can promise you it was not. For reasons that will become a little more clear in a minute. But I've never found myself to be, or thought of myself as a particularly stylish guy. But what I can say is that at this point in my life, I am comfortable with who I am. And that's why I'm going to do what I'm going to do right now. So what that is right now I am going to share with you one of the greatest sources of shame and embarrassment of my entire life. And it's something that I did not share with my wife until about 2.5, 3 years ago, until we'd already been married for over 6 years and together for a decade. I think we can all agree that adolescence is a challenging time. And it was during that time that I developed a condition called gynecomastia. And gynecomastia is a disorder of the endocrine system that results in increased size of male breast tissue. And so in addition to the standard changes that happen during adolescence, I developed boobs. Needless to say, I became very self-conscious and extremely insecure. I hated the way my body looked and definitely didn't want anyone else seeing it. That meant shying away from swimming and any other activity where I felt like I was going to be exposed. During high school sports, I would pretend to have asthma so that if there was any situation like shirts versus skins and I fell on the skin side, I'd pretend to have an asthma attack and pretend to have asthma. I do not have asthma. I played multiple sports through high school, so asthma attacks were frequent, but it was not possible to stay away from that 100% of the time. So teasing, bullying, name-calling, and quite frankly, nicknames that nobody wants happened. So when I was a freshman in college, I had plastic surgery to address the physical aspects of the condition, and everything went well. I wish that I could tell you that that's where it ended, but it didn't. It still impacts me to this day. I still deal with body image issues. Unless I'm in the water, I'm going to have a shirt on. This isn't a shining story of triumph, but it also isn't a sad story, and it's definitely not me asking for sympathy. Though I still deal with those challenges, I no longer live with that shame. The shame that kept me from sharing this with my partner for a decade, the freedom to share this with you now, and the humiliation that I had is gone, and that's because of time, personal growth, and work. And I now have a willingness to make myself vulnerable in exchange for real human connection. And that is a vulnerability that I'm going to extend beyond this room. So, as I've been talking for the last 15 minutes or so, posts like that one, pictured, have been posted across my social network, all in an effort to personally break out of that single lens. and share a full truth on social media. So that thing that I would not share with my wife until a couple years ago is now a public post on that evil internet. And that means that some very close friends and a lot of my family is going to be learning about this for the first time today. And that's okay. Again, I have no shame about that anymore. I'm under no illusion that this is groundbreaking. And I have a modest social network, to say the least. This is just a first attempt at me communicating a more realistic narrative and personal narrative on social media. A personal story, taking control of that. I am a lot more than napkin drawings and pictures of my dog. I am also not an early morning drinker of expensive tea, just FYI. So if you take one thing away from this today, let it be that you have control of your own narrative, online, on the internet, and off. And your worth is not measured in likes, shares, retweets, followings, followers, and thumbs up. Thank you.
Hear this blessing, friends, as we go out into the big bad world, which contains the evil internet. I wanted to draw your memory from the very beginning of our worship hour, especially through Rachel's powerful poetry, to what I think Jack is pointing at, which is a very ancient narrative, one begun by the peoples who started Fountain Street Church 150 years ago. It is the story of liberation made possible by the smallest voices lifted up powerfully amongst us. And I will suggest to you that your presence on the internet is a table, and that you might be powerful in your life this week and be blessed to go forward to use your voice to set a different table somehow informed by the gift of Jack's movement, the music this day, and Rachel's poetry, and that very, very old story, which we speak anew here each week. Go, friends. Life and life abundant awaits you and yours. Be free.